Hi, my name is Ellen Lutz. I'm the Health Sciences Librarian here at UMass Amherst, and in this video, I'm going to talk about my suggestions for how to go about reading an academic article. One of the big things is you don't read it in order, at least not the first time through. To read and truly comprehend a scientific article, you often have to read it more than once. And so this is sort of the way to approach that first pass through of the article. Of course, before you even select the article, you've probably read the abstract, which gives a nice summary of the article, of what they did. And in some cases, like for this particular example I have, they actually break the abstract down into the various sections. So reading through that gives you a nice summary overview of what the article is all about. One thing to keep in mind as you're going through is any terms that you come across, words, phrases that you don't know, make a note of those. And you can look those up later. Sometimes, especially on this first pass through, if you stop to look up all that stuff, it kind of messes with the flow. So just kind of keep that running list and make sure you follow up and look those up if it's not clear after you've read through it. So after reading through the abstract, the first thing to do that I suggest doing is looking to the end of the introduction. In this article, it's called the background. Sometimes it's called, a literature review section. The last paragraph is usually where they talk about what they're actually planning to do in the study. And in this case, yes, this paper reports the results and it lists the 3 study questions that they're looking for. If you need a little bit more, sometimes looking at the paragraph before that. So this is an post hoc. So this is an analysis they did after they collected data from a study. So this preceding paragraph tells a little bit more about the study. So that can be helpful to look at as well. Next, you actually want to skip there. I actually skipped to the very end of the article, not quite the very end, but look for the discussion section. Because in the discussion section, they're talking about kind of what they did and where their objectives met. That's kind of the first thing to look for. And in this discussion, it talks about, here's what it was. And if you skim through this paragraph here, it actually talks about those 3 questions that they had and answers, and gives the basic answers to those. The authors then also should talk about, if they didn't meet their objectives, if they didn't get the results that they thought, kind of why maybe they didn't, and looking at comparing it to similar studies. So you'll see this next paragraph, they're talking about, they're highlighting some other articles that have done, similar previous studies that have looked at maybe similar things. And then they talk about how, that they, I'm not scrolling very well here. So that, to our knowledge, this is the only published analysis of objective limit. So they think that that's what the unique contribution to science that they're making with this article. They talk about limitations, which is good because no study is perfect. There's always things that factors that could influence the results. So those are all things that you should look for in the discussion section. And in addition to the limitations, then, kind of do they interpret their results? So they talk about what it means. So in this case, yes, they have a section on, what the implications are for public policy or for research and policy from the study that they did. There also could be, sometimes there's a conclusion section, which just sort of wraps things up. So those are kind of things to look at initially. Another thing to point out, they have some acknowledgments, but more articles, more recent articles, they're also including sources of support, or sometimes it could be conflict of interest or funding, just to kind of disclose where they're getting the money for the study, because that could lead to some unconscious bias. Not to say that if you're getting funded by somebody, that means that your results aren't valid, but as a critical reader, those are things you should be aware of, just to know that information and keep that in mind as you're looking at the results and how they analyze them. So after you've kind of said, okay, here's what they're doing and here's what they think they did, then it's time to go back and look at a little bit more of the details of how they did it. First thing I usually do, just to get sort of, again, that high level overview, is I'll scan through the methods, and especially the results section, to look for the figures and tables that they used. One side note, there are, figures and tables are 2 different ways of presenting data. So a table is, like an Excel spreadsheet. So it's something that's going to be arranged in rows and columns. and those are numbered, so we have table 1, table 2, and then if you scroll down, you also have, other things. So a figure is any other type of information that is presented, and those get numbered separately. So we had table 1 and 2, but this is the first figure, so this is figure 1, and then we have table 3. So those are ways to kind of give an overview. In addition to a graph like this, other types of figures could be images. One of the things, like for this study, they could have showed images of, what the screen looks like on the app after people, brought up the nutritional information for the study. Or sometimes it'll be pictures of, microscope slides, just anything that's a representation that's not a presented in tabular format is going to be a figure. And then finally, after kind of going through the figures and tables, then that's when I'm going to go back and dig into the methods and the results. And things to look at when you're looking at the methods is look at the sample size they used. In this case, they had 1,357 household shoppers across New Zealand who owned smartphones and were 18 and older. So because for a lot of things, depending on the conclusions that they're trying to draw, the bigger the sample size, the better. Actually, that's almost always the case. So the bigger sample size, the better. And if it is a small sample size, see if they can kind of explain why that's the case. The ability to reproduce. So does it look like, they're following a procedure that someone else can do, and why they chose those particular procedures or the methods, the process that they decided to use. I mean, for this study, that's not as applicable because it's like they had this data and they were using it. But for experimental studies where you're gonna have do some sort of manipulation, kind of why you're choosing to do it that way. And then in the results, just kind of looking, do the results make sense based on what they said they wanted to do and the way that they were going about doing it. Do the tables and figures accurately and clearly describe and represent the data. So then after you've done that, then you might want to, again, that's your first pass through, go back and potentially the next time read all the way through start to finish.